The archive room was colder than usual that evening, an unnatural chill that clung to the walls like a warning. Dust floated in the projector light as Dr. Leora Mansfield pushed open the creaking door, her footsteps echoing through a chamber that had not changed in nearly a century. She wasn't supposed to be there. None of them were. But ever since the anonymous email arrived, subject line, "Look where they told you not to." Curiosity had overtaken protocol. The team gathered around a long oak table, its surface worn from decades of neglected scholarship. Bundles of parchment and brittle manuscripts lay scattered, many untouched since the 1800s. Dr. Yosef Rami, the youngest historian in the group, adjusted his glasses as he unrolled a strangely heavy scroll. Unlike the others, this one was sealed with a hardened wax emblem depicting a sun crossed by a diagonal blade. None of them recognized it. None of them knew that before the night ended, this symbol would come to haunt their research, and their lives. When the wax finally cracked and the parchment unfurled, silence took the room like a held breath. Before them lay a hand-drawn medieval map, painted with mineral pigments now faded into a palette of ghostly earth tones. Rivers, mountains, fortresses, and trade roads were meticulously marked, yet right in the middle of the region, where every historical record declared only uninhabited wilderness, the map showed a kingdom. A kingdom with defined borders. A kingdom with cities. A kingdom with a crown sigil beside its name. One word, written in flowing archaic script, Aurelia. For a moment, no one spoke. Leora leaned forward, tracing the outlines of the unknown kingdom with a shaking fingertip. "This shouldn't exist," she whispered. "There are no accounts of this. No chronicles. No dynasties. Nothing." Yosef swallowed hard. Maybe it was a proposed territory, a planned state that never materialized. But even he didn't sound convinced. The map carried the unmistakable weight of authenticity, handmade parchment, iron gal ink, mineral dyes, all consistent with maps from the late medieval period. The borders were too precise, the trade routes too detailed. Whoever made this had been there. They had known Aurelia intimately. And yet, history had never mentioned it. As the group analyzed the parchment under UV light, something unexpected happened. The pigments responded differently than they should have. Instead of the usual faint fluorescence of medieval ink, the map glowed in fragmented, almost coded patterns, as if layers of information were hidden beneath the visible surface. Leora adjusted the wavelength, and for a split second, brief enough to doubt their own eyes, they saw faint symbols overlapping the territorial lines. Symbols that did not belong to any known cartographic tradition. Symbols that looked almost like warnings. Tension thickened the room. Questions spiraled: who drew this map? Why was it sealed away? Why had every trace of this kingdom been wiped from recorded history? Then Yosef noticed something on the lower margin, tiny handwritten notes, barely legible under centuries of decay. He leaned closer, deciphering the fragments aloud: revised after the decree, ensure removal, borders corrected following orders. The final line was smudged, but one word remained unmistakable: erasure. Before they could process what that meant, Leora made a chilling discovery. The map contained coordinates. Not typical latitude-longitude, but a set of triangulated measurements referencing natural landmarks, mountain peaks, river forks, and ancient forests, allowing someone to locate a specific site. The ink used for these coordinates was different, newer than the rest of the map, almost as if added by a second hand decades later. "Someone updated this," she murmured. "Someone wanted this location remembered, even after the kingdom itself was erased." A cold draft slipped through the archive hall, making one of the overhead lamps flicker. The silence was now heavy, oppressive, as if the room itself disapproved of their discovery. The deeper they studied the map, the more impossible it became to dismiss. Every detail contradicted established history. Every stroke of ink whispered a truth the world was never meant to know. Then, as Yosef rolled the parchment carefully, he noticed something peculiar on the back, barely visible, like a shadow in faded ink. A smaller symbol, identical to the wax seal, the sun crossed by a blade. Beneath it, 3 words written so faintly they were almost lost to time: erase it again. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Whatever this kingdom was, someone had tried very hard to make sure the world forgot it. And now, by uncovering the map, they had reopened a door that powerful forces once closed. And somewhere in the coordinates, something waited, something buried, something hidden, something that might explain why a kingdom could exist, and yet officially never have existed at all. The room seemed to tighten around them. Leora exhaled slowly. "We have to follow this," she said. But none of them knew yet that the coordinates didn't lead to a ruin. They led to a secret someone had killed to protect. The official histories of the region were airtight, dense, interconnected, and exhaustively documented by scholars across centuries. Every dynasty, every war, every famine, every shifting border had been recorded, copied, debated, and preserved. That is why the discovery of Aurelia immediately felt like an intruder in the timeline, a ghostly anomaly that should not have existed. It wasn't simply the absence of a kingdom, it was the absence of any space in the historical narrative where such a kingdom could have fit. Dr. Leora Mansfield spent the first nights after the discovery drowning herself in medieval chronicles. She revisited the works of royal scribes, foreign envoys, traveling merchants, writers who documented everything from battles to the price of barley. Yet not one of them mentioned Aurelia. No alliances. No trade. No wars. No treaties. Not even a passing rumor about a kingdom beyond the forests. It was as if someone had surgically removed it from the historical bloodstream. And yet, the more she read, the more she saw gaps, subtle, almost invisible at first. Land surveys that abruptly ended mid-page. Tax records listing villages that appeared for a decade and then vanished without explanation. Legal decrees referencing unclaimed borderlands right in the center of what the newly discovered map showed as Aurelia's territory. These inconsistencies, once dismissed as clerical errors or lost documents, now looked like strategic absences. A troubling pattern began taking shape. One scholar had noticed it long before the modern team. Her name was Dr. Amelia Voss, a brilliant yet controversial academic whose career collapsed under mysterious circumstances. Decades earlier, she had proposed that regional history contained constructed voids, areas deliberately underdocumented. Her papers were ridiculed, labeled conspiratorial, and her research funding was abruptly revoked. Within a year, she resigned, left the academic world entirely, and spent the rest of her life in quiet isolation. Leora remembered hearing about her during graduate school, the historian who went mad chasing ghosts. But now, reading through Amelia's surviving notes, faded ink, frantic scribbles, cross-outs, it was clear she wasn't mad. She was close. Too close. Amelia had circled the same region marked as Aurelia on the forbidden map, noting discrepancy in territorial accounts. Removal of settlements from 4 independent sources. Why? Next to it, she wrote a haunting question: who benefits from a kingdom forgotten? Leora felt a chill. Amelia Voss had identified the holes but lacked the missing piece, the map itself. Without physical evidence, her theories had been easy to discredit. Now, years after her death, her work suddenly fit into place like the foundation of a puzzle long buried. Yosef, tracing trade routes on the discovered map, found another perplexing detail. The roads leading into Aurelia were meticulously drawn, but they led from regions whose own historical maps never mentioned any such connections. It was as if 2 parallel histories existed, the one documented, and the one erased. How do you remove a kingdom from memory? Yosef muttered, running his hand through his hair. Dr. Helena Ward, an expert in medieval propaganda, responded quietly: you erase its alliances, its enemies, its trade routes. You remove the records of everyone who ever interacted with it. And if those people protest, well, history shows us they don't protest for long. Her words lingered in the air like smoke. The more they cross-referenced maps from different centuries, the stranger the findings became. One 14th century map featured an empty area labeled simply, Terra Obscura, a phrase historians typically interpreted as uncharted wilderness. But that map's edges showed signs of scraping, as if a previous label had been carefully removed. In another, a border was drawn unnaturally straight, covering what should have been a valley documented in earlier surveys. It wasn't just that Aurelia was missing. It was that something had replaced it. The final piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly, from the university's private archive, a second map, discovered years earlier but dismissed as a forgery. This one dated 2 centuries after the first and was drawn in a completely different artistic style, yet it showed the same kingdom. Same borders. Same emblem. Same name. Aurelia. The team gathered around it in stunned silence. If one map could be a hoax, 2 separated by centuries could not. Especially not when both depicted a kingdom entirely absent from all known historical records. What does this mean? Yosef whispered. Leora exhaled slowly. It means someone didn't just erase Aurelia once. They erased it repeatedly. But the revelation came with something darker, a sense that each rediscovery had consequences. Records from scholars who studied anomalies in the region often ended abruptly. Careers ruined. Papers retracted. Funding cut. Historians socially isolated or quietly forced into retirement. As if the truth punished those who approached it. And as they stared at the second map, Helena noticed something chilling, the same emblem in the corner, a sun crossed by a blade. Not a cartographic symbol. Not a signature. Something else. Something deliberate. The emblem wasn't just marking a kingdom. It was marking a warning. And just as they began piecing the fragments together, Yosef found a marginal note written in a cramped hand on the second map, revisions approved. Removal complete. But removal of what? A kingdom? A people? An entire era? The question tightened their chests with dread. And though none of them said it aloud, all felt the same thought tugging at them: if Aurelia truly existed, then someone with immense power decided the world should forget it. And that someone might not be gone. The deeper the team pushed into the mystery, the more they realized that maps, even centuries old, had fingerprints. Not literal ones, but stylistic flourishes, mathematical habits, ink movements, and notational quirks that revealed the identity of the cartographers who drew them. And this was where the puzzle took its darkest turn yet. Because the 2 Aurelia maps were not created by the same hand, nor even from the same generation, yet both cartographers shared the same fate. They vanished. Not metaphorically. Not artistically. They disappeared from their respective eras with no final works, no death records, no burial sites, no apprentices who remembered their last days. It was as though the very people who documented the world had been removed from it. The first cartographer, believed to have created the earliest map, was a man named Matthias Grunwald. A meticulous artist, known for his loyalty to detail, he spent decades mapping trade roads, fortresses, and lesser-known villages across the northern territories. His surviving works were regarded as masterpieces, precise, balanced, almost obsessively accurate. But reading through his letters preserved in the National Archive, a disturbing shift became clear. At first, Matthias wrote with excitement about new commissions and discoveries. But then came the later entries, letters warped by water damage, ink smeared by what looked eerily like trembling hands. His tone had changed entirely. "They watched me today," one letter read. "Not openly. Not enough to accuse. But I felt it. The way one feels a storm before it appears." In another, the handwriting nearly collapsed into illegibility: "The kingdom, it shouldn't be there. But it is. And if it is there, then why was I told never to draw it? Who decides what belongs on a map?" His last surviving letter ended mid-sentence: "If anything happens to me, tell." The ink line dragged off the page. Matthias never sent that letter. A messenger found it in his studio 2 weeks after his disappearance. The door had been locked from the inside. His tools were left precisely where he always placed them. Candles had burned to stubs. His travel cloak still hung by the door. It was as if he had simply evaporated. The second cartographer, creator of the later Aurelia map, lived 200 years after Matthias, Ronan Bellamy, a scholar known for challenging conventional geography. Ronan believed that maps shaped political reality, that borders were not merely recorded but constructed. His ideas made him controversial, even dangerous to the institutions that preferred the world to remain neatly defined. Ronan's journal, recovered by the modern team through a private collector, revealed a parallel descent into paranoia. At first, he approached Aurelia as an intellectual curiosity. But as he found inconsistencies in trade ledgers and disappearing settlements that matched the landmass labeled Aurelia, the tone of his writing shifted from curiosity to fear. He described waking to footsteps outside his home, hearing conversations fall silent when he entered taverns, receiving unsigned letters urging him to abandon the lost kingdom. At first he laughed them off, dismissing the warnings as academic rivalry. But then the threats sharpened. One journal entry contained only a single sentence, written repeatedly, "Erase it again." What unsettled the modern historians most wasn't just the repetition, but the pressure marks beneath the ink, deep grooves in the parchment, as if Ronan carved the words with mounting desperation. Ronan vanished before his final map could be published. His belongings were auctioned off within months, his home repossessed by the crown, and his colleagues instructed not to speak his name publicly. Officially, he died of travel complications. Unofficially, no one believed that. And in both men's surviving materials, identical symbols appeared, the sun crossed by a blade. Exactly the same as the emblem found on the forbidden Aurelia maps. That symbol wasn't decorative. It was coordinated. Intentional. Repeated across centuries by people who never knew each other. Helena, staring at the emblem under magnification, murmured, "This isn't a cartographer's signature. This is a mark of ownership. Or control. Or threat," Yosef added quietly. The room fell into uneasy silence. The pattern was undeniable, those who mapped Aurelia vanished. Those who studied it were silenced. Those who questioned its absence were erased from academic memory. But then came an even more chilling discovery. In Ronan Bellamy's final journal pages, pages that modern archivists nearly discarded as damaged, there was a sketch. Faint, incomplete, but unmistakable. It depicted the same coordinates found on Matthias's original map. Two men, 2 centuries apart, had marked the same forbidden location. And beneath Ronan's sketch, scribbled so faintly it required enhancement to reveal, were the words, "The truth lies buried." But not forever. The team exchanged silent glances, all feeling the same tightening in their chests. If these maps had cost Matthias and Ronan their lives, what would finding what they pointed to cost them? The journal was smaller than expected, bound in cracked, dark leather, its spine nearly disintegrating from decades of neglect. When Leora first held it, she felt its weight in an almost symbolic sense, as though the object itself carried the burden of a man who had lived and died chasing a truth no one wanted to acknowledge. The inside cover bore the name Ronan Bellamy, but the handwriting beneath it was uneven, as if written in haste or fear, property of no institution. No one quite knew how the journal resurfaced. A private collector claimed it had been part of an estate sale, but the details of its chain of ownership were full of dead ends and vague transactions. Still, once the team opened it, they understood why someone had tried to bury it. The early pages were steady, composed, the work of a disciplined academic. Ronan wrote about geographic inconsistencies, mismatched land surveys, and political anomalies that intrigued him long before he discovered Aurelia. He mentioned his fascination with hidden histories, stories whispered between scholars but never documented. He even referred to Matthias Grunwald, noting that his disappearance felt suspicious but tragically forgotten. But then, almost abruptly, Ronan's tone shifted. His words grew sharper, sentences shorter. His observations became laced with tension, as if he sensed eyes reading along over his shoulder. There is a kingdom missing. A landmass with borders. Rivers that begin and end where no natural path allows. This is not error. This is removal. Ronan wrote that he found references to Aurelia in a restricted archive, buried inside a mislabeled collection of maritime logs. The logs described merchants traveling through a region with thriving markets and bustling cities, a region that should have matched Aurelia's location exactly. Yet the margins of the logs were defaced with black ink strokes, deliberate attempts to obscure names and places. He described obsessively tracing erased words under angled light, discovering hints of a royal family, trade disputes, and an alliance treaty that contradicted every accepted political narrative of its century. The more he uncovered, the more the journal documented his unraveling. One entry read, "Someone came to the door today. They didn't knock. They waited. I opened it to an empty street. But I know what silence feels like." This silence was intentional. Days later, his entries took on a frantic energy. Maps are not mirrors of the world. They are weapons. Whoever wields them controls what is remembered. I found the emblem again. Sun. Blade. The symbol is older than any document. A marker, perhaps. Or a signature of those who rewrite history. There were dozens of such symbols sketched in the margins, variations of the Aurelia emblem. Each iteration seemed more distorted, as if his hand trembled each time he redrew it. Then came the sketches of ruins. Dark, jagged outlines of toppled towers, shattered pillars, collapsed bridges. At first glance, they resembled fictional landscapes, but the team recognized stylistic cues matching structures from medieval architectural styles. Some drawings contained human figures, small, shadowed silhouettes, and in several illustrations, the figures bore brands on their wrists or chests. A sun crossed by a blade. Leora swallowed hard. He was documenting a purge, she whispered. Yosef nodded silently. Or trying to. But the most disturbing part was that entire sections of the journal were missing, pages ripped out deliberately, leaving only jagged remnants of parchment. The torn edges formed a pattern. Ronan had removed pages describing the kingdom's downfall. The team could see traces of ink bleeding from the torn stubs, like wounds that still remembered what was lost. In the middle of the journal, a single line stood alone across an otherwise blank spread. Erased history is more dangerous than forgotten history. The final third of the journal showed Ronan's descent into isolation. He wrote of sleepless nights, shadows shifting outside his windows, and coded messages left anonymously on his doorstep. Messages like, "Let the kingdom stay buried. Your work threatens the balance." And then, "Do not follow the coordinates." It was this warning, more than anything else, that made the team lean closer. The last intact page was different from the rest. Its ink was darker, fresher, written maybe only days before Ronan vanished. The handwriting was tight and controlled, as if he had fought to steady himself. The location is real. The destruction was deliberate. Matthias knew. Others knew. They silenced him. They will silence me. But the truth cannot stay underground forever. Below the writing, in carefully measured ink, Ronan drew a triangular formation of symbols, landmarks, mirroring the coordinate system found on Matthias's original map. When Yosef compared the two sets, the alignment was perfect. Two men, hundreds of years apart, had pinpointed the same place. But what sent a shiver through everyone in the room was the faint smear of red discoloring the bottom corner of the page. Blood, perhaps. Or something else. Ronan had ended his final entry with a haunting declaration, "If you are reading this, I failed. Follow the path. But understand, those who erased Aurelia do not fear the past. They fear what remains." The team sat in silence as the weight of Ronan's final words settled over them. Whatever had consumed him was no longer confined to the journal. And the coordinates he left behind were waiting. Waiting for someone else to take the next step. The coordinates were more than numbers, they were a summons. A pull. A warning disguised as a destination. For days, the team debated whether they should follow them, logic argued caution, but curiosity clawed at their resolve, and in the end, curiosity won. The land the coordinates pointed to lay in a quiet, forested valley, an area officially classified by government records as geologically unremarkable. Yet the moment they arrived, every instinct told them otherwise. The forest was unnaturally still. Even the wind moved softly, as if careful not to disturb something ancient buried beneath the soil. Dr. Cameron Hale, lead archaeologist and a man known for his calm skepticism, stood silently at the edge of the clearing, surveying the terrain. Cameron had spent his entire career unearthing forgotten civilizations, but this site felt different. It felt hidden, not by time, but by intent. The clearing was shaped oddly, too symmetrical, too flat, as though shaped by design rather than nature. The ground, when tapped, gave a muted, hollow echo. Leora crouched down and brushed away a layer of dried leaves, revealing a faint ridge, straight, unnaturally straight. Stone, she realized. Something man-made. Start here, Cameron instructed, marking the ridge with fluorescent flags. As the excavation began, the team uncovered their first anomaly, a row of stone foundations, each carved with geometric precision. But every stone bore signs of deliberate destruction, hammered edges, shattered surfaces, scorch marks. These weren't ruins felled by war or erosion. These were ruins someone wanted eliminated. As they worked deeper, they uncovered fragments of pottery, broken blades, rusted metal clamps, charred wooden beams, artifacts consistent with a medieval settlement. But every identifiable symbol had been scraped away. Every crest chiseled off. Every inscription defaced beyond recognition. The attackers hadn't just killed a kingdom, they had erased its name, its memory, its identity. Someone didn't just destroy this place, Helena whispered. They tried to unwrite it. Yosef nodded grimly. This was systematic. Cameron, though visibly disturbed, tried to maintain scientific detachment. But there was one discovery that shattered that detachment completely. A stone slab. Massive. Intact. And unmistakably marked with the emblem they had seen on the maps, the sun crossed by a blade. The symbol was carved deep, almost reverently, as though it had been meant to last centuries. Yet around the edges of the slab, scorch marks formed a blackened halo. Why would someone burn stone? Leora murmured. To hide something carved beneath, Cameron replied. And so they cleared the ash. Inch by inch. Brush by brush. Until faint lines of additional engraving emerged, lines that formed a second symbol beneath the first. A royal emblem. A kingdom seal. Aurelia, Yosef said under his breath. This is their crest. The silence that followed felt heavier than the stone itself. The deeper they dug, the more it became clear that this site hadn't been abandoned, it had been annihilated. Ash layers suggested intense fires. Burn patterns indicated accelerants. Entire walls had been pulled down, not by natural decay, but by coordinated destruction. Tools were melted, bones shattered, inscriptions hammered away. This wasn't the aftermath of a battle. It was the aftermath of a purge. But the most unsettling discovery came late in the day, when Cameron ordered the team to extend the trench on the northern side. As the soil was lifted, the ground released a faint metallic smell that made several team members recoil. It was the smell of old death. Moments later, the shovel hit something solid. Not stone. Not metal. Bone. They uncovered a mass burial pit. Bodies, dozens, maybe hundreds, piled in layers, many overlapping, limbs tangled as though thrown carelessly. The bones bore fractures, identical fractures. Same angle. Same impact zone. Each skull had been crushed with precision, as if by identical weapons or identical order. This wasn't a chaotic massacre, Cameron said, voice trembling despite himself. This was systematic execution. Some skeletons bore remnants of metal clasps, perhaps once holding clothing or armor. Others held fragments of rings or ceramic pendants. A few had faint discolorations on the sternum, likely remnants of branded insignias long lost to time. One pendant, remarkably intact, bore a faint circular impression, possibly the Aurelia crest before time and violence faded it. Leora felt nausea rising. They weren't just killed. They were erased. The dig site grew more disturbing as the sun dipped behind the tree-line. In the failing light, shadows stretched long across the uncovered ruin, making the ancient kingdom feel alive again, alive in a way that suggested its silence had always been deliberate. As they worked under portable floodlights, Cameron found something strange embedded at the far corner of the pit, a slab of obsidian-like glass, unnaturally smooth, unlike any material expected from the era. When they lifted it, they discovered etchings along its underside, delicate, almost mathematical notations. Yosef ran his fingers over the markings. These aren't building measurements, they're coordinates. Additional coordinates. More locations. More secrets buried. But when he matched them against the forbidden map, one detail froze everyone in place. The additional coordinates formed a triangle, a perfect geometric relation to the original site. Each point marking what might be separate Aurelia strongholds, outposts, or mass graves. None of these locations were on modern maps. None of them existed officially. Just like Aurelia. As they packed up for the night, the forest grew unnervingly quiet again. The crew felt watched, though no animals stirred. No branches snapped. No wind brushed the leaves. The air was too still, too measured. Before leaving, Cameron lingered at the edge of the burial pit, staring into the layers of erased lives resting beneath centuries of soil. He had always been a man of science, unshaken by grisly discoveries, armored by rationality. But this time, he felt something he couldn't articulate. A weight. A warning. A sense that the past did not want to stay buried, and that their presence at the site had awakened something long suppressed. "We're not supposed to be here," he murmured. Leora heard him. "But we are." He nodded slowly, but his eyes remained fixed on the pit. "This wasn't history burying itself," he said quietly. "Someone buried it. Someone powerful. And they expected it never to be found." As the team withdrew, the lights flickered for a moment, just long enough for them to see the carved emblem on the stone slab glow faintly in the darkness, as if awakened. The symbol of Aurelia. Or the symbol of those who destroyed it. Either way, the message was clear, the coordinates had led them to truth. But truth came with consequences. And they had only uncovered the beginning. In the days following the excavation, the team barely slept. Not because they were working non-stop, though they were, but because the site refused to leave their minds. The ruins had revealed death, destruction, and deliberate erasure. Yet something essential was still missing, a sense of who the Aurelians truly were. A kingdom was more than its bones. It was its people, its leaders, its stories. And slowly, from scattered artifacts and fragmented documents, the identity of Aurelia began to reassemble itself. The crest they found, once faint and scorched, was now digitally enhanced, revealing an astonishing level of artistry. The emblem showed a radiant sun rising behind a stylized crown, the rays etched with delicate patterns representing knowledge, governance, and enlightenment. But over this symbol was the now familiar diagonal blade, a violent strike through a symbol of illumination. "It's beautiful," Helena murmured, tracing the enhanced image with her fingertip. "This wasn't a kingdom of conquerors. This crest represents philosophy. Wisdom. Governance through learning." Leora nodded. "Which makes the destruction even harder to understand." Through material reconstruction, the team pieced together records of Aurelia's ruling dynasty. The royal line traced back to a figure now identifiable as Queen Seraphina Aurel, a woman who governed during one of the most politically volatile periods of the medieval world. Yet the surviving artistic depictions, mostly charcoal sketches, likely smuggled or hidden, showed a queen very unlike her contemporaries. She wasn't depicted with swords, armor, or war banners. Instead, she wore robes embroidered with sunbursts and scrolls, symbols of laws and knowledge. One recovered fragment from a partially burned manuscript described her as a queen of gentle resolve, whose strength lay not in her armies, but in her mind. Her policies must have threatened someone, Joseph suggested quietly. Indeed, they did. Reconstructed agricultural reports indicated that under Queen Seraphina, Aurelia invested heavily in communal farming, education, and equitable trade. The kingdom enacted reforms that minimized taxation on the poor while limiting the influence of wealthy landowners. It was progressive, too progressive. Surrounding kingdoms relied on strict hierarchies and economic control. A neighboring monarch would view Aurelia's prosperity as a dangerous example. Even more alarming to powerful rulers of the time was Aurelia's belief that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Scholars from other lands were invited to study in Aurelia. The kingdom constructed what appeared to be early public libraries, unheard of for the era. And Seraphina commissioned maps, detailed maps, of regions beyond her borders. Maps were power, Helena said. If Aurelia shared its cartography freely, it undermined others who controlled information. But the breakthrough came when the team uncovered something extraordinary, a sealed clay tube buried under collapsed stone. Inside was a parchment rolled tightly, miraculously preserved by clay and ash. It was a royal decree. The handwriting matched that of a court official whose name the historians recognized from obscure political logs. The decree was encoded with a cipher common in diplomatic communication of the era, and after 3 days of analysis, Leora cracked it. When she finished reading, her hands trembled. "It contradicts everything," she whispered. The decree seemed to respond to an unnamed threat, an alliance forming between 3 neighboring territories. The document suggested that Aurelia had intercepted letters hinting at a planned territorial partition of their land. But rather than prepare an army or negotiate surrender, Queen Seraphina issued an order for mass evacuation protocols. She tried to save her people, Leora said. She saw it coming. The decree referenced the Night of Ashes, a phrase that appeared nowhere in official history. It detailed instructions for removing archives, storing knowledge in hidden vaults, and encrypting information onto relics that could survive destruction, even stone and metal tablets. The coordinates found in the journal matched descriptions within the decree. It seemed the court had intentionally marked safe sites for survivors or future discoverers. But then the decree grew darker. It spoke of betrayal. Not external forces. Not foreign armies. The danger rises from within. Someone inside Aurelia helped erase it, Joseph whispered. Someone close to the queen. The decree cited a traitor in the royal court, someone who collaborated with Aurelia's rivals. Their identity was not written, instead, their name was encoded in a cipher that had yet to be deciphered. But the decree left a chilling declaration: trust no bearer of the blade mark. The blade mark. The symbol carved through Aurelia's crest. The same symbol that appeared centuries later on the maps drawn by Matthias and Ronan. This symbol was not Aurelia's. It was the mark of those who wanted Aurelia destroyed. Helena exhaled shakily. This wasn't a simple military conquest. This was ideological warfare. Intellectual warfare. As they continued analyzing artifacts, they uncovered more about Seraphina's life. She was the daughter of a scholar and had traveled widely before ascending the throne. Her writings, those that survived, revealed a woman deeply committed to justice, empathy, and progress. But they also revealed fear. In one fragment, she wrote, "To give knowledge is to give power. But power shared is power threatened." Towards the end of her reign, her tone grew grim. We are surrounded not by enemies of land, but enemies of truth. If Aurelia falls, it must fall quietly, lest they erase even the memory of why we existed. The emotional weight of these words settled heavily over the team. The discoveries painted a picture of a kingdom fighting not for expansion, not for dominance, but for the right to exist as an enlightened state in a world threatened by enlightenment itself. Aurelia had become a target not because it was dangerous, but because it was inspirational. The last major revelation came from a collection of stone tablets unearthed at the site. The inscriptions, damaged, fragmented, but partially recoverable, listed members of the royal household. Near the end of the list was Queen Seraphina's name, followed by an unfinished inscription, "Last seen." The rest was obliterated. It wasn't erosion. It wasn't accidental. The stone had been deliberately scraped. Her fate was wiped out, Leora whispered. On purpose. Cameron stared at the unfinished line for a long moment. If they erased her death, he said, maybe it's because she wasn't killed that night. A possibility that would reframe everything they understood. As dusk fell over the dig site, the surviving ruins of Aurelia seemed to glow faintly under the floodlights, as if the ground itself remembered what history had forgotten. The royal crest, the decrees, the encoded warnings, they all pointed to a kingdom that had been too enlightened for the world around it. A kingdom punished for trying to illuminate darkness. But beneath that illumination was a secret deeper still. Queen Seraphina's story wasn't finished. And the missing inscription on the stone hinted at a truth buried far beyond Aurelia's ruins, a truth waiting in the shadows of the next revelation, one that would unravel everything they thought they knew about the Night of Ashes. The phrase had echoed through fragments of the royal decree like a ghostly refrain, enigmatic, poetic, and ominous. The Night of Ashes. For weeks, it had lingered without clarity, a shadow stitched between documents, hinting at catastrophe but offering no specifics. But the more the team uncovered, the more certain they became, this night wasn't a metaphor. It was an event. A violent, orchestrated night that ended a kingdom. And now, for the first time in centuries, its pieces were falling into place. It began with a crumbling letter found inside a rusted metal container buried beneath the remains of what once might have been a central archive. The letter, written in hurried strokes, was from a royal scribe whose name barely appeared in surviving texts, Albrecht Valon. His words trembled with urgency. If this reaches any soul beyond Aurelia's borders, know that what happened here was no war, it was execution. His letter described the final hours before Aurelia fell. Armies did march, but not with banners or heralds. They came silently under clouded skies, torches snuffed, armor muted by soot. They slipped through the forest surrounding Aurelia, guided by someone who knew the terrain with intimate precision. A traitor. Albrecht wrote that the queen sensed betrayal long before proof emerged. Her advisors urged evacuation, but Seraphina refused to abandon her people abruptly. She believed diplomacy could still prevail. But on the night of the attack, diplomacy died. The team found corroboration in military records from neighboring regions, entries shockingly bare, conspicuously vague, noting simply, territorial adjustment complete. No mention of battle. No mention of Aurelia. Just bureaucratic language describing the erasure of an entire civilization. But Albrecht's words painted a more devastating picture. He described fire raining on the central courtyard. Soldiers storming homes. Citizens dragged from their beds, branded, and forced into the streets. Those who resisted were struck down instantly. Mothers shielding children. Scholars trying to protect books that soldiers burned in piles. Libraries, once the pride of Aurelia, ignited like torches against the night sky. No one was spared. No one was allowed to leave. The team read in heavy silence as the narrative unfolded. A baker named Jovan was among the first killed. His diary was one of the few civilian accounts discovered. In it, his last entry read, "Smoke rises beyond the palace walls. They say it is the end. My wife and children sleep. I will wake them soon. I pray I am wrong. He never wrote again. Further entries from other civilians, scraps of personal letters, some burned, some buried, formed a mosaic of human tragedy. A soldier named Thane wrote to his brother in a distant village, confessing he had tried to defect, refusing to participate in the destruction. His letter ended with, "If I live, I will find you. If I do not, please know I tried to save them." The heartbreak in these voices made the Night of Ashes more than an academic subject. It became a wound, reopened centuries later. But perhaps the most haunting testimony came from an unexpected source, a child. At the site's northern trench, the team found a small clay tablet, crudely carved. At first they thought it was a broken tool. But under deeper examination, it revealed itself as a child's depiction of the night, stick figures running amid flames, a tall structure crumbling, and a sun symbol, Aurelia's crest, tipped sideways as if falling. Next to it, in shaky markings, the sky turned black. Cameron wiped dust from the tablet with an unsteady hand. This is someone's final memory. Yet amid the sorrow and violence, something else stood out, something that made the historians exchange uneasy looks. Multiple accounts described the attackers as wearing a distinctive insignia, not that of any known kingdom, but the blade mark. A diagonal slash across a sun-like emblem. The same symbol carved into the ruins. The same symbol stamped on the forbidden maps. The same symbol mentioned in the Queen's encoded decree. Who were they? Yosef whispered, voice thin. Helena replied, whoever they weren't an official army. Her theory gained weight when the team uncovered a charred leather-bound book protected under fallen stone, its preservation a miracle. Its pages were blackened, brittle, but enough remained to identify it as a council log kept by Aurelia's government. It documented heated debates in the kingdom's final months. Mentions of threats. Suspicious emissaries. Anonymous letters warning the Queen to abandon her reforms or face consequences. But the final entry, dated the very night Aurelia fell, issued a chilling account. They have come. Not the armies we expected. They march with no flags. They fight with no honor. Their eyes burn with doctrine. Tonight, Aurelia becomes silence. The team exchanged glances. Doctrine. The word struck a nerve, an intentional, structured ideology behind the assault. But then the most pivotal discovery emerged. In a partially collapsed chamber, the team found fragments of a mural. With lights angled just right, shapes began to appear, a palace engulfed in flames, a crowd of fleeing civilians, and above them, a towering figure holding a blade symbol banner. Yet below this destructive figure was something startling, an image of Queen Seraphina herself. She stood opposite the invaders, not with weapons, but with a scroll held to her heart. Her eyes looked determined, sorrowful, unbroken. It's a depiction of resistance, Leora said softly. She didn't run. Further study of the mural revealed encrypted markings, likely messages intended for future survivors or discoverers. Helena deciphered one line, "If the night takes us, let the truth remain hidden in stone." But one part of the mural unsettled the entire team. The Queen was not shown falling. She was shown walking into darkness, a hooded figure leading her away from the flames. The implication was clear, she escaped. And with that revelation, something else clicked into place. Why was her death inscription erased on the royal tablets? Why were her final days so meticulously covered? Why were there no surviving records of her body, tomb, or burial rites? Because the Night of Ashes didn't end her life. It ended her kingdom. But the climax of the section arrived with the uncovering of a final artifact, a broken iron crest pressed into the dirt near the mural. When cleaned and examined, the crest bore the blade mark, but with a new detail, a series of circular patterns around the blade. A symbol not of Aurelia's destroyers alone. A symbol of an organization. One with hierarchy. One with reach. One that existed before Aurelia's fall, and possibly long after. As Helena placed the artifact on the table, her voice trembled. This wasn't just a kingdom being attacked. This was a coordinated historical purge. Someone wanted Aurelia erased from the world, and they succeeded. Leora whispered, but why erase a kingdom like this? What could they have feared so much? At the edge of the trench, Cameron simply stared out at the darkening tree line. The forest rustled faintly for the first time since their arrival, as if the land itself exhaled, relieved or warning, none could tell. The story was becoming larger than Aurelia. Larger than history. And as the team prepared for the next stage, one truth settled coldly into their bones: the Night of Ashes wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a secret that would shape centuries. A secret that someone had killed to bury. And the next discovery would reveal exactly who those people were. What emerged next was not a relic or a ruined structure, but an idea, one so vast and chilling that it reframed everything the team had uncovered so far. It came in the form of a preserved book, discovered beneath layers of ash and debris in what once might have been Aurelia's administrative quarter. Protected by fallen stone and an airtight cavity, it survived the centuries in an almost miraculous state. The book's cover bore the blade mark. Its pages were stiff, darkened by smoke, but the ink inside remained eerily intact. The title, written in a formal, authoritative script, read, "The Doctrine of Erasure." At first glance, the document resembled a political treatise or legal manual. But as the team began deciphering its contents, horror unfolded line by line. The doctrine detailed a covert political alliance that existed beyond the borders and treaties recognized by medieval kingdoms. An alliance that viewed itself not as conquerors, but as custodians of order, protectors against dangerous states whose ideologies could destabilize the balance of power. But the most alarming aspect wasn't the doctrine's existence. It was its purpose. The document described what it called erasure states, kingdoms deemed too progressive, too independent, or too ideologically threatening to be allowed continued existence. These states were not to be conquered or absorbed. They were to be removed, erased from maps, memory, and historical continuity. A land forgotten is a threat dissolved, one passage read. Yosef's voice cracked as he read aloud from another section: a people without record leave no legacy. A kingdom without name leaves no future. This wasn't just a political alliance. It was a machinery of silence. The doctrine laid out chillingly precise methods for executing erasures, destroying archives, eliminating map references, targeting scholars and record keepers, burning symbols, flags, and royal seals, inducing forced migration or mass execution, discrediting or eliminating dissident historians, coordinating narrative control across multiple kingdoms. Each step matched the evidence found at Aurelia's ruins. The team read in growing disbelief as they encountered the most disturbing chapter, on the removal of Aurelia. Despite centuries of missing records, here it was, Aurelia's name, openly acknowledged in a secret doctrine. Yet the doctrine never described the kingdom's culture or history. Instead, it focused solely on the threat Aurelia poses to established hierarchies. It referenced the queen's reforms, her radical educational policies, her willingness to share cartographic knowledge with commoners. All of these actions, the doctrine stated, risked dismantling the natural architecture of power. The language was cold, procedural, devoid of empathy. Aurelia was framed not as a flourishing kingdom but as an intellectual contagion. Helena's hands shook as she traced a line that read, "Eradication must be absolute. Records must be aligned. Memory must be controlled." "What kind of people write something like this?" she whispered. Leora answered softly, "People who fear change more than they value life." But what chilled them most was a notable omission. The doctrine listed several erased states, small principalities, minor enclaves, tribal confederations, but when it came to Aurelia, the space after its name was blank. There was no explanation for why. No specifics about the attack. No details about the traitor. No justification. Just a single cryptic note in smaller script, "Special case." What does that mean? Yosef asked. No idea, Helena murmured. But whatever Aurelia represented, it scared them more than anything else. The next pages introduced symbols and organizational structures that suggested the doctrine's architects maintained cells, small, secret groups embedded across kingdoms to carry out historical manipulation. Their symbol? The blade mark. The very emblem found on the maps, the ruins, the cartographers' journals. This symbol was not the crest of Aurelia's enemies, it was the insignia of a covert order dedicated to reshaping history itself. The team pieced together the doctrine's protocol for silencing anyone who rediscovered erased states. The strategies included political suppression, academic discrediting, and, when necessary, physical removal. That explains Matthias, Leora whispered. And Ronan, Yosef said softly. And Emilia Voss, Helena added. They weren't wrong. They were silenced. The doctrine ended with a final chapter sealed with wax. It took hours for the team to soften the ancient seal without damaging the parchment, but once they opened it, their breath caught. Inside, handwritten in what appeared to be a different ink and penmanship, was a warning: if the knowledge of removed kingdoms resurfaces, initiate protocol renewal. Protocol renewal. A process described only as the reapplication of erasure. Leora swallowed hard. Meaning, if someone rediscovers a lost kingdom, they erase the discoverers too. Helena closed the book gently, as if afraid the words within could reach out and strike. But something else gnawed at the edges of their thoughts, a question none of them dared voice until Cameron finally broke the silence: if this doctrine was written centuries ago, what if the order behind it never dissolved? What if it still exists? No one spoke. No one needed to. The implications were devastating. If the doctrine of erasure survived into the modern world, if its operatives still guarded history, then someone, somewhere, had been watching their excavation. Watching their discoveries. Watching them unravel a story that had remained buried by design. And the doctrine's final line echoed in all their minds: erase it again. The nightmare was no longer bound to Aurelia's past. It was now entangled with their present. And someone might already be moving to silence them next. For weeks, the team had worked under the assumption that Queen Seraphina Oral died on the Night of Ashes. It was the only conclusion that made sense: her kingdom was destroyed, her royal line wiped out, her memory systematically buried. But as they sifted deeper through Aurelia's remnants, one revelation after another forced them to question everything. And then came the sealed chapter. The final section of the doctrine of erasure, locked behind centuries-old wax, had shaken them. But what Leora discovered next, buried in a hidden compartment beneath the very same stone tablet, shattered the narrative entirely. It was a small scroll, delicate as breath, wrapped in a cloth embroidered with the faint remains of a sun crest. The ink was faded, the parchment brittle, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to Queen Seraphina. Her words began with despair: the city burns. The archives fall. Our enemies carry torches where scholars once carried lanterns. But then, the tone shifted: I will not die in this fire. Helena read the line twice, her voice barely above a whisper. There it was, confirmation that Seraphina did not perish during the assault. She had escaped, guided by a small group of loyal guardians who resisted the doctrine's forces long enough for her to flee through a hidden passage beneath the palace. The scroll detailed her escape into the forest, the same forest where modern coordinates later pointed. She described moving silently through ravaged terrain, hearing distant screams, smelling the thick stench of burned vellum, understanding her people were being obliterated not for who they were, but for what they represented. Seraphina's next entries were heartbreaking: I feel the weight of all I could not save. Aurelia was not destroyed for its land. It was destroyed for its knowledge. Her guardians led her northward to a remote refuge, a place marked on both Matthias's and Ronan's forbidden maps. But Seraphina made clear, she knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. The doctrine wanted her dead, not only to end her lineage but to ensure the idea of Aurelia died with her. Yet in her isolation, her writings became more determined, empowered even. She wasn't mourning her death, she was planning her legacy. One entry stunned the entire team: "If I cannot save my kingdom, I will save its memory." Serafina spent years, possibly decades, in exile. She disguised herself under the name Marindale, a wandering scholar who appeared sporadically in fringe records. The team began piecing together obscure documents mentioning a mysterious woman who traveled between remote monasteries, libraries, and scriptoriums, depositing fragments of knowledge like seeds she hoped would one day grow. A footnote from a minor monastery described her as a woman who spoke in riddles, carrying maps of places no one had seen. Another text, written by a reclusive monk, spoke of a visitor with deep sorrow in her eyes, who warned him, "Guard the truth. They are still watching." These fragmentary testimonies painted a startling picture. Serafina had spent her final years protecting the very information the doctrine sought to erase. She smuggled fragments of maps. She copied decrees. She encoded names. She left clues buried in places she knew the doctrine wouldn't think to search. It was her actions, her silent rebellion, that allowed the modern historians to rediscover Aurelia centuries later. But the revelations didn't stop there. Leora uncovered a hidden pocket sewn into the cloth that wrapped Serafina's final scroll. Inside was a thin sheet of vellum, on which was drawn a symbol not previously seen, an intricate spiral intertwined with the Aurelia sun crest. Helena leaned in. This wasn't a royal symbol. This was personal. The writing beneath it confirmed her suspicion: "For the one who finds this, know that Aurelia's fall came not from the enemy beyond our gates, but from betrayal within. A traitor. Someone from her inner circle. Someone with access to her strategies, her vulnerabilities, the palace's secret tunnels." Serafina never named the traitor. The cipher on the royal decree hinted at their identity, but the scroll offered something else, a reason. Fear is the most effective weapon of the oppressor. They feared knowledge. They feared a kingdom that shared what others hid. But there was one final note, written shakily, perhaps near the end of her life: "The organization that hunts knowledge does not die with time. They move in shadow, but they act in daylight. They continue their work in each new era." The blade mark. The doctrine's operatives. The silencers of history. She warned that they would evolve with the ages, embedding themselves in councils, political offices, religious orders, academic institutions, anywhere truth could be suppressed and narratives controlled. Yosef's voice shook as he whispered, "She's talking about now." The final lines of Serafina's writing sent a cold shiver through the group: "If you have found this scroll, then my kingdom has risen again, not in land, but in truth. But beware, truth is a flame. Those who fear it will come to extinguish it." And then, etched with fading ink as her last message, "They will come for you as they came for us." The room fell silent. No one dared breathe. The queen had not died helpless. She had fought beyond her kingdom's destruction, waging a secret war of memory against an institution built on forgetting. And in doing so, she had passed her mission to the future. To anyone bold enough to rediscover Aurelia. To anyone willing to defy the doctrine. To them. But Serafina's story raised a terrifying implication: if the queen survived, if her clues endured, and if the doctrine still existed, then the modern excavation wasn't just uncovering history. It was reopening a conflict that had never truly ended. And the shadow of the blade mark was no longer confined to ancient maps. It stretched into the modern world, and the next section would reveal exactly how far. The discovery of Queen Serafina's final writings should have marked a triumphant moment for the research team, a vindication of months spent assembling fragments of a forgotten kingdom. But instead, the room fell under a suffocating silence. Her warnings were not poetic exaggerations. They were instructions, almost predictions, aimed at anyone who might rediscover Aurelia long after she vanished into exile. And as the historians reread her words, a chilling realization settled over them: the doctrine of erasure might not be a relic of the past. It might be alive, active, and watching even now. The first sign came subtly. Cameron Hale noticed unusual discrepancies in the digital archive logs. Files the team uploaded, photos, scans, notes, were being accessed remotely by unknown credentials. At first, he assumed it was a glitch. But when nighttime access spikes appeared exactly when the team discussed sensitive findings, Cameron began tracing the digital footprint. The trail led nowhere, disappearing behind layers of encrypted rerouting, but the message was clear. Someone outside their circle knew exactly what they were uncovering. When Yosef attempted to retrieve older regional maps to cross-reference Aurelia's coordinates, he found multiple documents missing from the university database. The librarian insisted the files were never removed, but Yosef had seen them only days before. Physical copies were also gone. A sealed storage chamber showed signs of tampering, dust disturbed, shelves subtly rearranged, even though the archive required biometric entry. No alarms had triggered. No cameras recorded movement. It was as though someone had moved invisibly through the university, erasing evidence with practiced precision. Then strange things began happening outside work. Helena noticed a black sedan parked across her apartment for 2 nights. When she approached it, the car drove away without headlights. Leora received an anonymous envelope containing no message, only a photocopy of the blade mark symbol. Yosef's home office was broken into, though nothing was stolen. A single item was left on his desk, a blank sheet of vellum, aged, with a faint indentation resembling a diagonal slash. At first, they tried convincing themselves these incidents were coincidences. Academic work often stirred controversy, especially when challenging established narratives. But the pressure increased rapidly. Grant funding for the excavation was suddenly frozen due to administrative re-evaluation. Their university board demanded all materials related to Aurelia be turned over for confidential review. Cameron's field permit was revoked without explanation. Even their emails began bouncing unpredictably, as though filtered by unseen hands. The pattern was undeniable. Someone was tightening a noose around their research. The turning point came when the team received a leaked satellite scan from an anonymous source, an enhanced infrared rendering of the Aurelia excavation site. It showed geometric structures beneath the soil perfectly matching the palace layout reconstructed from Serafina's decree. That wasn't the alarming part. What frightened them was the timestamp. The scan had been taken months before the team discovered the site. Someone already knew. And someone had been watching long before they arrived. Leora enlarged the scan. Near the palace foundation, faint heat signatures indicated recent disturbance. Not from the team, these readings predated the excavation. It looked as though someone had searched the site repeatedly, digging, refilling, probing. They were not the first to follow the coordinates. Others had been there. Others who understood the doctrine's significance. Others who might still be close. The realization sparked a dreadful thought: if the doctrine continued through the centuries, adapting to new eras, then its modern successor wouldn't appear as a shadowy medieval cabal. It would embed itself into contemporary institutions, universities, governments, intelligence agencies, think tanks, anywhere narratives could be shaped and history curated. The erasure of an entire kingdom required coordinated influence. And that kind of influence didn't simply disappear. It transformed. Cameron theorized that the doctrine's descendants functioned as a decentralized network. No name. No headquarters. Just individuals and agencies aligned by purpose, control of knowledge. Erasure of destabilizing truths. Silencing of historical anomalies. Their symbol, the blade mark, would not be worn openly. It could exist as a watermark, a coded seal, an innocuous icon within modern bureaucratic design. Hidden in plain sight. And if this organization monitored rediscoveries, then their interference in the team's research made perfect sense. They were simply practicing protocol renewal, as described in the doctrine, re-erasing anything that resurfaced. Helena presented another unsettling revelation. While reviewing recent academic journals, she noticed subtle yet recurring inconsistencies in modern historical publications, references quietly altered, citations redirected, certain scholars discredited without clear reason. It resembled a pattern of guided editing, the kind used to rewrite narratives across time. Even more disturbing, some articles cited non-existent research or linked to broken files, signs of deliberate obfuscation. The doctrine had evolved. In the digital age, erasure was faster, cleaner, invisible. But the team experienced another shock when analyzing the palace excavation images under spectral filters. On one collapsed archway, they discovered fresh scratches, barely days old. And not from archaeologists. The marks formed a small diagonal slash. The blade mark. Someone had visited the site recently. Someone with access. Someone leaving a warning. The final blow arrived quietly. Leora received an email with no sender address. No subject. No text. Only an attachment, a blurred photograph of the team standing together near the excavation. Taken from a distance. Unaware. Watched. The message was clear. The doctrine, or whatever it had become, knew exactly who they were. And then, the last line from Queen Seraphina's scroll echoed through their minds: they move in shadow, but they act in daylight. The modern conspiracy was no longer theoretical. It was real, active, and closing in. The historians weren't simply studying the fall of Aurelia anymore, they were becoming the next chapter of the same story. The doctrine had erased a kingdom. It had erased scholars. It could erase again. And now, as unseen forces tightened their grip, the team realized terrifyingly that the question was no longer whether the doctrine still existed. It was how soon it would come for them. The confirmation of Aurelia's existence did not feel like a victory, it felt like a responsibility. As the team stood over the ruins, floodlights casting long shadows across shattered stone, they understood they were no longer just historians. They had become witnesses to a truth the world was never meant to see. Every artifact recovered, every inscription decoded, every whisper of Queen Seraphina's legacy pieced the kingdom back together in defiance of centuries of forced silence. But beneath the triumph was unease. They knew the doctrine, or its modern successor, would not allow this revelation to spread uncontested. Yet despite the threat, the ruins radiated an undeniable sense of resilience. The broken walls seemed to breathe with memory, as though Aurelia itself refused to remain buried any longer. As the team prepared to leave the site, Leora looked back one last time. In the stillness, she felt the weight of Seraphina's final message: truth demands guardians. And now, they were its keepers. Because if a kingdom could be erased once, it could be erased again. And the only defense against erasure is remembrance.